Hi, my name's Tim Tony Stark Refat, and we're talking about my car. Here we've got a ground up restoration of a Mark 1 Interceptor. The Jensen company had 24 chassis left over from the CV8 because most people wanted an automatic. So this is a 64, 65 chassis which should have gone on the CV8, but no one wanted a manual. And I bought this in the start of the 80s for £500. This was my second car. My first car was a Humber Super Snipe, which was a luxurious tourer with its 3 litres straight 6. This was my second car. I saw it at the garage where I got my Humber Super Snipe serviced and MOT'd, and this car had been sent back to the factory because they originally came with 383s. There were 23 right-hand drive manuals and 24 cars. One was the left-hand drive 1966 French car for their car show. This one had been sent back to the factory by one of the owners in the past. It's all misty to me. And had a 440, had a fiberglass hood, had these 7-inch wolf race wheels, which are rare as rocking horse shit, and had suspension improvements. It's still got the primitive Austin Westminster suspension you find on a CV8, and had been lightened dramatically. So I used to drive round behind Brighton, around Lewis, Dukes of Hazzard, 130 every day, zoom, 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 going completely batshit crazy before the time of the cameras. Then it was stored away for years. Some garage said they'd restore it, and instead left it out in the rain and destroyed it. And now I've decided to fully restore it. So the mission statement was that all 1960s cars are gutless. You have Ferrari GTO with 300 horsepower. They're worth upwards of 38 million. We have the DB4 Zagato with 300 horsepower. We have the racing E-types with 300 horsepower. Normal E-type is about 200 horsepower, because of course we have the SAE, which is 20% more. They take off all the ancillaries, stick them on a dyno. So I decided, well, I've got a 440 Jensen stuck in there by the factory when the owner got upset with the original 383. It's got the manual gearbox. It's got the 288 to 1 back axle, so it'll do 0 to 60 in first gear. It's been lightened. Normal Jensens weigh 3,500 pounds if they're a Mark 1. This one had the 7-inch wolf race wheels, which I said are rare as rocking horse shit. Scimitars had 6-inch ones, these are 7-inch. We have the battery in the boot, racing fuel tank. The road style wheels, which are a Mark 1, which are very heavy, are replaced by these aluminium wheels, which are at least 50 pounds lighter. We had the fiberglass hood, which is stored away, which this steel hood is over 100 pounds, 120 pounds or whatever. The fiberglass hood you can lift literally with one arm, so it's about 100 pounds lighter. We've got no power steering. We've got no cooler for the automatic transmission. We've got a aluminium custom built radiator, which is £50 lighter than your standard cast iron radiator which you get on Jensens of all sorts. The engine is the same weight as a 383 because we've got aluminium heads, and all of the interior fittings have been stripped out. So this car, instead of weighing 3,500 pounds, weighs around 250 pounds stripped down. So this car is very light. A Mark III will weigh around 4,000 pounds, 3,900 pounds, but if you put it on a weighbridge, you'll find it's about 4,000 pounds. So they're very heavy cars. This is lightweight. Then of course the mission statement was to build the most powerful European classic car within the requirements of the factory. So it's all well and good, I can put in a 600 cubic inch Chrysler, twin turbos, get 2,000 horsepower, but then you've got a hot rod. You've got a 440, so the mission statement was building as much power from the 440 within the factory specifications. So of course that meant that we had to go with what the factory offered. So we start at the back. We want to put on big tyres, so we're going to put wolf race wheels, but 19 by 11s to get some big tyres. So what did the factory offer? There was only one Big Bertha with the Dion suspension test car which had these on, so we stick them on. That fits in within the classic car specification. The 288 1-to-1 suspension which came with this car has to be left. The turquoise interior, which Regen are doing me a favour by supplying turquoise carpets, turquoise interior, all the fittings done for me by Regen are being supplied. The manual transmission, which is an A833, can take 700 horsepower. So we've got a 4-speed gearbox that can take 700 horsepower every day. And as we know, there were only 24 of these cars built. Most of them have been scrapped. Half have been scrapped at least. If the person who's got the left-hand drive one in America wants to sell it to me, sell it to me. I'll buy it. If not, who cares? But the A833 is good for 700 horsepower. Now, of course, we want to see how much power we can get from this car from being a historic racing car within the specifications of historic racing cars, which is don't change the parameters of what was allowed by the factory. That's the parameters. So we can't build a 600 cubic inch engine with twin turbos or superchargers, because then it's a custom car. What did the factory offer? The factory had a 4.15 crank, which they built into a Mark III for the Hemi conversion head Mark III car. They built a Hemi conversion Mark III car with Hemi heads. It was not powerful enough, so Ian Orford, who owned Jensen at the time, put a 4.15 crank to make it 493. So this engine is 493, as allowed by the factory. We are being nerdish because we're only allowing what the factory would allow. So let's see how much power we can get out of this one-of-one 440 manual Jensen, which was converted after it was built to a 440. You might say this isn't allowed, but if you've got a Bristol, there's a Bristol converted to a 440 by the factory, which was offered for £80,000 and now is super valuable. This is the only Mark 1 manual lightweight racing car convert to a 440. So when I bought it at a 440 and had the other stuff on it, but of course the original 440 was a 375 horsepower 440, which if you look in the Dodge yellow book with all the horsepower, was a 330 horsepower engine. The 6-pack, which you got in an SP, is 350 horsepower if you've got the exhaust manifolds for an SP. But all Interceptors have log manifolds, so they make 330. Even if you got one of the first SPs, which is supposedly 385, that's rubbish, because Chrysler, in their big yellow book, state that the 6-pack with the 6-pack exhaust manifolds, which aren't on a Jensen because they won't fit, was 350 horsepower. So as one can see, the 6-pack engine pumps out 330 because it's got inferior log type manifolds. This 440, as when I bought it, had 330 because it was a high compression 375. But remember, in the 60s it was SAE, which is take off all the ancillaries, water pump, belt, stick it on a dyno, get the horsepower without all the ancillaries. Now modern cars have all the ancillaries, stick them on a dyno, and you get net horsepower or DIN horsepower. So the mission statement was, I was upset by Bugatti Veyron Supersports. I wanted to take the piss out of them. Why? Because that's what I do. It's my mission statement to goad people to get really, really upset. I love it. I'm one of those people that loves irritating people. So to build a car which has more horsepower than a Bugatti Veyron Supersport in a car built basically with a chassis in 64, 65 as a CV8, couldn't sell it, put it into a Jensen, eventually they got rid of this in 68, is the biggest piss take on the planet. And I got the leading Chrysler engine builder in the UK, Dave Millen, to build the engine for me to my specifications. He said I was mad, crazy, the engine would blow up, it wouldn't make any horsepower. But the problem is, since you've got a 2.88 to 1 back axle, you can't have your normal American souped up 440 or 493, because remember I'm allowed to get to 493 because of the 4.15 crank stuck on the Hemi conversion head engines. We're sticking to the nerdish Chrysler textbook. We're only allowed to put on what Chrysler put on and Jensen put on this engine. So with 2.88 to 1, the car can't be a normal race car or a normal road race car, because they make power at 4,000 up to 7,000, and with a 288 to 1 I'm not allowed to change the back axle because it's a classic car. It's got a 288 to 1, so it has to make power from idle. How the hell do you make massive horsepower when that thing will make power from 1,000 RPM all the way up to 6,500 RPM tabletop? Impossible, because you put in massive duration, massive lift, and remember above 6.67 lift on the camshaft, the wear means you've got to change the engine every month. You've got to take the bits, change the camshaft lifters because it wears them out, too much spring pressure. So the mission statement was to make a road car within the Jensen specifications. So this engine is what the Jensen provided, 10 to 1. I could have gone to 10.5 to 1 or 10.75 to 1 with the SP, but Dave Millen said he wouldn't build the engine. I was upset. Why the hell won't you build it to 10.5 or 10.75 to 1? He said, I'm not going to build it. Why? Well, because you won't be able to run it on normal pump gas. It will start pinking or have to reduce the advance, I was upset. I'm not going to make the horsepower. Why did you do this? Well, because I want you just to go to garage and put the premium gas in and the thing will run. So, since he's the engine builder and I can't bully him, he built it only 10-1, which is standard for 383s. And remember, the SPs were 10.5-1, or you get 10.75-1. And the smog motors, the J-class Interceptor, was 8.2-1. So that was upsetting. That deeply, deeply hurt me because, you know, as a car freak, I want maximum horsepower. So this engine, you go to a normal service station, stick in premium gas, and it'll just run and run and run. It doesn't need aviation fuel because remember, we're going within Jensen's specification because I don't want the people from the classic car fraternity going, well, you built this massive engine, but Jensen never offered it. Jensen offered 10-1 compression ratio engines. They offered the 4.15 crank. We've got that. I'm within the rules. The Big Bertha wheel arches, which look glorious on the car, with a Dion back suspension, was a prototype. That's allowed. I want to take this historic racing. Next, of course, how do we get massive amounts of horsepower when Dave Millen has reduced me to 10-1? Tears draining down my face. I was upset. I want 13.5-1 or 14.5-1. Running on aviation gas, but unfortunately Jensen didn't offer that. Next, of course, we got the problem that the cylinder heads on this car were 906 heads. Of course, they had 220 181 valves, big ones, but these cylinder heads only provide at most on 13.5-1 500 horsepower. 500 horsepower. I wouldn't get out of bed for 500 horsepower. That bores me. I mean, the Ford's GT40, which is the epitome of naturally aspirated cars and won Le Mans 3 times with the Holman Moody heads, is 480 horsepower. I don't need 20 horsepower above a GT40. You know, they're for poor people. And the AC Cobra, which won Le Mans a couple of times before that, had the 427 dual quads, which according to the Ford people with the high riser heads is around 400 horsepower. Dave Millen had a AC Cobra engine in and it only made 400 horsepower. The owner went mad and he said that's all you get from them. They only make 400 horsepower. No, I wanted Bugatti Veyron Super Sport power. Why? Why not? Because I'm worth it. So we can put twin superchargers, twin turbochargers, and the thing will make 2,000 horsepower. But then all of the classic car people say, it's a hot rod. It's a hot rod. You can't do that. It's not worth anything. It's a hot rod. It's a hot rod. So the mission statement was to make huge amounts of horsepower within the constraints of being a Jensen car allowed by the factory and what would be allowed within the 60s. So luckily, the saviours of Chrysler, a company called Edelbrock, who most of you won't have heard of, came up with the Victor heads. These are superb heads. So this car has got Edelbrock Victor heads. You won't find many cars in the country with Edelbrock Victor heads. They're taller. They've got a port which goes up and then down. You can actually look through them, and these ones have been hand ported by Dave Millen. And these ports, of course, have to be the standard port size because Jensen didn't do max wedge ports. And if I do max wedge ports, all the Jensen people go, oh man, this is a hot rod. Max wedge ports weren't allowed on Jensen's. They just had 906 heads or 452 heads, and this simply isn't a classic car. No, these have got standard port heads. They just flow a lot more air. So we've got the Victor heads with the standard Jensen port, not max wedge. If I had max wedge heads, the problem is with max wedge heads, airflow is stalled. Bigger heads, slower velocity, which means this engine wouldn't make power from idle. This car will kill you. You put your foot down at 1000 RPM, heavy foot, it will take off and it'll give you 500 pound-feet of torque, 500 horsepower, and you'll drive into a brick wall or anything near you. This car must be driven lightly, and we call this car killer because it'll kill people. Cars do not make horsepower from idle. You put your foot down, 500 pound-feet of torque, 500 horsepower. This engine was put on the dyno. Dave Millen took it up to his friend who builds builds small block Ford engines for racing cars, the ones that are on the small Ford GT40s and TVRs, etc. This engine will make 630 on the dyno with all the ancillaries through mufflers. What we had to make was an engine that fitted within the nerd Jensen people. So of course we couldn't use a single plane manifold. Wasn't allowed on the Jensen. We had to use a dual plane was on all Jensens. So this is a dual plane manifold. We couldn't use a big carb. We have to have an 850, which was found on Jensens. The 850 Carter thermoquad found on your J-class 440s. Inlet, the ports on the heads have to be standard Jensen size, because the smaller the ports, the more power you make low down. But of course you can't make horsepower, can you? Of course you can, if you're a genius like me. And of course the engine has to be built not to blow up. So we've got forged internals, forged pistons, a stud girdle that holds it all together, because Jensen's didn't have 4-bolt main bearings. They've only got 2-bolt, so you need a stud girdle. All professional engine builders have a stud girdle. And luckily, Chrysler engines have big bore lifters for the camshaft, because we've got central camshaft lifted by bores, which means that we can have a NASCAR grind. Chevys and Fords are crap because they don't have big bore lifters. A Chrysler has big bore lifters, so we can whack up the camshaft super fast with a NASCAR grind. So the valves open very, very quickly, giving us huge horsepower, much more than a Ford or a Chevy. And of course, Competition Cams, who I bow down to, built me a special grind camshaft for the engine, which has small duration. Small duration means that the engine will idle at 1000 RPM, blah, 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 and make power from 1000 RPM. All of these big power Chryslers make power from 4000 RPM, which is useless because they've got a 2.88 to 1 back axle. I need to change that to a 4.11 if I'm going to drive the car, which then means that's not a classic car. I've got to keep everything standard. We've got the Austin Westminster double lever shocks. We've uprated the disc brakes from Coopercraft. Classic car, not hot rod. But what can we do within the constraints of what we're allowed? That's the mission statement. Why? Because I like pissing on Ford GT40 owners, DB4 Zagato owners, Ford GTO owners, the 300 horsepower racing E-Type owners. Please, you're not fit to even lick the shit off my shoes. and all the other so-called 60s cars, which are all gutless. Remember an E-Type 265 SAE, which is about 212 horsepower, didn't. So these things are gutless. Dave Millen builds, or used to build, loads of E-Type engines for Eagle with the stroker crank 4.7, which made 300 horsepower. Wow, 300 horsepower. Oh my goodness. I'm swooning. 300 horsepower. Wow. Now let's build a 1300 horsepower, because I hate Bugatti Veyron Supersports and I want to outrage Audi, I think, who own Bugatti. I might be wrong, but I think they do. With a 60 car built in 64, they finally sold the chassis in this one, 68, with 1300 horsepower. So we got a solid lifter camshaft, which has very low duration, 242, 248, stupid for a 493, with 657 lift, only 10-1. Dave Millen, bad boy. I wanted 12.5-1 at least, but you can just go to garage and fill her up, and she'll just run. Heavy-footed people like Duncan, who are boy racers, kill themselves within 5 minutes. Me, I'm light-footed. I'm old, I'm slow, I like getting there safely. So I can drive Killer easily, but he'll die in it. Then of course the engine has to have exhaust manifolds. They said you can't put full exhaust manifolds on a Jensen, proper tube manifolds. No, we built ones that go forward and then backwards. Later on we can show you the ones in the garage, which have come off because we're detailing the engine. We've got a MSD distributor, which is a must. MSD, we bow to you. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The old double points distributor I had on the car had to be adjusted every month. The carburetor has to be within the constraints of Jensen, which only allowed 850. So this is an 850 Barry Grant with vacuum secondaries. Remember, Jensen's only had 6 packs, which don't flow enough, or 850 Carter thermoquads. So we've got the 850 carburetor with vacuum secondaries, which unfortunately doesn't produce the horsepower. We dynoed it with the 1000 HP Holly, all bow down to Holly, wonderful carburetors, which make 630. With the Barry Grant, we only make 610 horsepower with all the stuff attached. Here we've got the custom made headers. As you can see, they bolt on and go forward. Everyone said you can't put full race headers on a Jensen. Why not? I can, because I'm worth it, and I got shed loads of money. So these headers allow you maximum horsepower. Now let's go into the myth of Chrysler engines. If you look in the yellow book, a 383 from a Jensen will make 260 horsepower, according to the book, before they went to the Mark 1.5, which makes 280 horsepower. What's the difference? They had better exhaust manifolds, they had bigger exhaust valves. 280 horsepower from a 383, 6.3 litres, 280 horsepower. Oh my goodness, wow. I'm getting an Audi shit car that makes 400 horsepower. The 440 in a Jensen would make 284 horsepower net. Look in the Dodge yellow book, they dynoed every single engine. The 6-pack, oh, this is super fast, 350 horsepower. So all the people who say their SP makes 385 because it was the first one of 3, it's all bollocks. Because of course they're log style manifolds, they made 330. That's all they're ever going to make. 330 horsepower from a triple carbureted 7.2 litre engine. Wow, big horsepower. And the car I got it with was a 375 440, which in net horsepower, according to my big yellow book, was 330 horsepower. Now, of course, we come into the technicalities. We need a big aluminium distributor, so we lose 50 pounds because my original, radiator was very heavy. This is aluminium. We're losing weight all the time. The car came with a fiberglass bonnet. The bonnet weighs, well, Duncan found it difficult to lift, so it's over 100 weight.
No, that was the metal one.
Sorry?
The metal one, yeah.
The metal one, yeah.
Yeah, the metal one.
Big one, and he's a big guy.
It was heavy.
The fiberglass one you can actually lift one-handed.
Yeah. And the scoop you could balance on one finger.
Exactly. We've got a ram air hood scoop, so we'll be building out a plate here which sticks to the bonnet to get ram air. This car was we decided was going to be insane. Why? Because we're worth it, and we wanted to shit on all the other 60s classic car collectors. You got 300 horsepower in your race car, GTO worth 38 million upwards. Ah, shit, 300 horsepower? I wouldn't get out of bed for 300 horsepower. It's boring. We want 1300 horsepower. So the mission statement was to build an engine which is a classic car, not a hot rod. I can make 2000 horsepower, 440 with twin turbos or twin superchargers. No, what's allowed by the Jensen people. So this engine makes 630 with the big 1000 HP, 610 with the allowed. Barry Grant 850. Now, of course, how can we make more horsepower? Because 600 odd horsepower is boring. I'm bored with 600 horsepower. So we have ram air. So let's stick with the Jensen engines. If you increase the advance and open exhausts on a 383, you'll get 320, according to the yellow book. On a 440 J-class, you'll get 284, which goes up to 320 horsepower. And on the 6-pack, if you have open exhausts, advanced ignition, you get 380 horsepower. Big, except you can stick in a Chevy like the aftermarket people who stick Chevys in Jensens, and you get 429. Turnkey reliability. So you can see the Jensen engine is pretty boring. No, it isn't. This Jensen engine, the 440, can be made to be insane. That's my mission statement. Let's make a Jensen engine insane. So with the ram air, we go to 5% more, 665. Now, of course, we go to standard 60s technology. If we connect the two exhaust systems together on a 6-pack, we get 25 horsepower. Those things only made 350. We got 700 horsepower engine, as we'll see. We get 50 more horsepower. So just having a pipe connecting the two exhaust pipes, we get 50 extra horsepower on one of these insane engines. That's big. So we've gone from 665 to 50 more, 715. Holy shit. We advance the ignition. We have open exhausts, which this car has, which was on the 426 race car with the max wedge heads and the cross-plane manifold, the 426 drag racing cars with the big looping exhaust manifolds. This one, of course, has and will have, they've been come out to be cleaned, switch. So we have open exhaust. The noise you can hear 2 miles away. It's just unbelievable. I don't know where you can use it because of noise pollution, but 2 miles away they'll be going, holy fuck, what the fuck's happening here? And on a 6-pack, when you do the advanced ignition, open exhaust, you get 40 horsepower on a 350 engine. On a Hemi, you go from 390 to 420. On a 383, you go from 280, if it's a Mark 1.5, to 320. 40 horsepower increase. So on double the engine power, you're getting another 80 horsepower. Let's be rational about it. Let's be really conservative. So open exhaust, advanced ignition, we've got up to 715. Let's be really conservative. Instead of saying 80 horsepower, let's just take it up to 750. So we get a guaranteed 750 horsepower from this little engine. Everyone goes and badasses Chrysler engines and puts Chevy engines in Jensen's Interceptor R's. I'm a Dodge fanatic, everything Chrysler. I love Chrysler. Hemi engines. I adore them. My mission statement is to worship Hemi engines. 440s are even bigger. They don't have the cylinder heads, but thanks to Edelbrock, who are the saints of the Chrysler engine, we can get 750 horsepower plus out of a naturally aspirated engine. Let's get some more. We need more. 750. I wouldn't get out of bed for 750. I'd fill my bladder up and have a pee for 750, but I wouldn't do any more than that. Let's get more horsepower. So, of course, what do? We look to the glorious Battle of Britain pilots with their supercharged Merlins. How did they get more power out of their supercharged Merlins to intercool the engine? Because, of course, intercoolers are heavy. They used water methanol injection. So we're going to stick water methanol injection on this car. Well, remember, we're sticking with the constraints of a naturally aspirated 60s car, which is allowable. So we stick water methanol, which, according to the water methanol people, if we advance the ignition massively, which adds power, gives us 10% more horsepower. If we stuck 12.5 or 13.5, we could run it on water methanol all the time on pump gas. We're not allowed that because Jensen never offered 2.5, 13.5, 14.5, 15.5 compression ratios. Remember, we're classic car people, not hot rod people. 10% on 750 is another 75 horsepower, which gives us 825 horsepower, allegedly. I'm not saying it will, but we're going with the science. 825 horsepower naturally aspirated. That, of course, is boring. I'm bored. 825 horsepower? Nah. How do we get more horsepower? What did they have in the 60s to add more horsepower? Nitrous. Yeah. Mad scientist. Being a chemistry graduate, I like nitrous. Anything chemical. Yeah. So, at the moment, this car's boring because we've only got the Zex 300 horsepower base plate and 15-pound bottle, which adds another 300 horsepower, which means we're only up to 825 plus 300. That's 1125. That's boring. 1125 horsepower. The Bugatti Veyron Supersport makes 1180. They insult me, the Audi people. How dare they have more power than my old pre-66 car, which was only sold off because they couldn't sell the manuals. And they built 24 because they had 24 manual gearboxes and chassis. So these were the leftovers, the poor things. Poor car. They love you. I love you. Killer. I love you, killer. I love you. Why should this poor little car, which was mistreated by Jensen owners, they all want automatics, to be the bitch of Bugatti Veyron Supersports? So, of course, we are going to next year get another 15-pound bottle of nitrous, the NOS kit for 500 horsepower. And remember, when you pump in nitrous with water methanol, it increases the power. So instead of 500, you get 550. And you must run, if you want to keep the engine alive, water methanol, because nitrous burns the pistons. Water methanol cools them. And for nitrous, you need big carbs. So unfortunately, we'll have to deviate from the Jensen spec. So if you take it to historic racing, we'll have to keep the Barry Grant carb. But if we go for ultimate burnouts, we don't. We need loads of fuel and loads of exhaust. Open exhaust, big 1000 HP Holly carb. Holly, we bow to you. We love you, Holly. That will then mean we'll get over the 1300 horsepower mark with crude 60s technology. This, of course, fits in the mission statement, which is to prove that in the 60s, this one of one 440 Jensen, which was sent back to the factory to stick a 440 in because the owner was bored with a 383, could have 1300 horsepower. We won't go plus, because remember, we have to be conservative, because we stick all these percentages, and if you stick it in practice, it might not. But this will definitely make 1100 horsepower with the Zex Nitrous kit. With the dual Nitrous, which you're ordering next year, will make 1300 horsepower. And remember, the Bugatti Veyron Supersport was only 1180. The Bugatti Veyron was 980. And of course, the Bugatti Veyron Supersport, 3,800 pounds, I think. The Bugatti Veyron, 4,200 pounds. This old classic car, only 3,250. We've got the old wolf race wheels, 7-inch. We're getting some wolf race wheel made custom, because of course we need more tyre. We've only got a 7-inch rim, so we're getting the 19x11 wolf race wheels. They look just like this, but with big 305. We might fit 315 on the back, because when you've got all that horsepower, you need big tyres. That, of course, is allowed because we're not putting horrible hot rod wheels on. We're just making replica wolf race wheels, but bigger. So the back will have 19-inch by 11 and 305. I want 315, but I'm not quite sure. Duncan says it might interfere with the wheel arches, and we don't want to grind them again. And that's all thanks to Dave Millen, who has a friend who makes custom wheels. So we'll have the original 7-inch by 15 and 19-inch on the back. And as you can see, a car which only weighs 3,250 with 1,300 horsepower is going to be fast. Luckily, the A833, unfortunately, this is only a 23 spline. But if it blows out, I'm going to put in a Hemi. I'm going to be a devil. I'm going to put in a Hemi 833, which is less splines and stronger. So we know we're going to blow the gearbox out. We know it. It's going to happen. So we put a Hemi gearbox in. This is the original 64 gearbox. We're going to blow it. 1,300 horsepower through a gearbox anywhere that only is good for 700 horsepower. But remember, I'm a classic car person, not a hot rod person. So luckily, it'll do 0 to 60 in first gear, like an ISO Griffo. ISO Griffos are wonderful. I bow down to ISO Griffo. 7-litre Can-Am, 7 litres, even the 350. Glorious cars. This car will be like an ISO Griffo. You can do 0 to 60 in first gear. And with 1,300 horsepower, the only problem is putting the power down. But this will do at least 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. If you don't believe me, put in 3,250, weight, 1,300 horsepower, even with naturally aspirated. I still think it'll do 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. Because with the water methanol, you're over 800 horsepower. All from an engine that came out the Chrysler factory and is within Jensen's specifications. All built by the genius of Dave Millen, who's built non-stop Chryslers and took it up to the engine builder to dyno it. So it made 630 on the dyno, but as I'm explaining, you add more. You've got ram air, you've got open exhaust, advanced ignition, dual exhaust pipes, water methanol and nitrous, which bumps the horsepower up. And the power comes from 1,000 RPM. So you blip the throttle and you die. heavy foot, you die. Me, I'm an old guy. So, you know, we just go, but. Duncan drives it. He likes driving his MR2, little sports racer. Whee! Up to 8,000 RPM. He's dead. If he drives this car, he'll die. I'm not joking. I'll bet you money. He will die. Me, old guy, just slowly. Like an old guy. You just wander around. Gently, gently. So this car for me, fun. Fun. Beautiful. Beautiful. Easy. Easy. No problems. But you young people, this car will kill you. Because remember, you've only got leaf spring suspension. We've uprated the brakes, but even so, they're abysmal for a car with 1,300 horsepower. They got Coopercraft, uprated, but they're original. Solid discs, they're not even ventilated. We've got the double lever shocks, which came with the CV8. You can cut the front suspension off, put in the Mark III front suspension, do the Interceptor R, put in the Jag IRS. Then it's not a classic car, it's a hot rod. Remember, this is a classic car. We wanted to build within what's allowed by Jensen and what they offer to the customers, a 1,300 horsepower car, which is a classic car. Just to say we got 1,000 more horsepower than a DB4 Zagato, GTO, E-Type racing car, which they did 7 more, didn't they, for $1 million. DB5s, 265 horsepower, whatever, boring. AC Cobras, 390 horsepower, that's boring. And 4 GT40s at one of them all, 480 horsepower with the Holman Moody heads. Boring. I'm bored. I don't even want to talk about them. They're boring. So the mission statement was to build something which is unique and only for me. Why? Because I'm worth it.